Good afternoon, and welcome to today's web seminar on newly released municipal solid waste data in the recently released Advancing Sustainable Material Management Facts and Figures 2017 report. This seminar is sponsored by the EPA Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. My name is Christine Beeling, and I'm managing the technical aspects of today's webinar. We're still waiting for others to log on. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. By now, you have the application up and running, and you should see the welcome presentation on your screen, the first slide with today's date. If you're having technical difficulties, go to the gotowebinar.com and click FAQs. The presentation slides will be advanced by the presenter. Note, a copy of the slides are also in your handout box. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Please go to the GoToWebinar control panel and type your question in the area that says questions. Click send to submit to the moderator. Please type your questions throughout the presentation. After today's seminar, there'll be a short evaluation. Please take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback is vital to helping us provide high-quality speakers and information to meet your needs. Today's seminar is being moderated by Kent Forrester from EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I will now turn it over to Kent.
Thank you, Christine, and thank all of you for joining the February 2020 edition of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. We are happy to have you participating. This 60-minute webinar is hosted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to provide training and a networking opportunity to state and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders interested in sustainable materials management. Today's EPA-hosted webinar will present the most recent update of the EPA's Facts and Figures Report 2017 edition. And that glorious, wonderful bureaucratic name called Advancing Sustainable Materials Management Facts and Figures Report 2017, assessing trends in materials generation, recycling, composting, combustion with energy recovery, and landfilling in the United States. It's a real pleasure to welcome to EPA's SMM Web Academy two EPA Facts and Figure gurus. I've had the distinct pleasure of working with these two people for a while, and EPA is lucky to have them. For their detailed biographies, please check them out on the SMM Web Academy website. Slides aren't moving? Okay.
The slides aren't moving.
Okay.
So Sarupa, the slides are on your end, on your computer. Are you trying to just hit the down arrow or the side arrow?
Yes, they're not moving.
Okay, so I think the best thing to do is to maybe restart your slides.
Why don't you take it over?
Sorry all for the technical difficulties. I can see your mouse moving. Up. Now we see a much larger slide, not the whole one.
Yes,
So restart the PowerPoint. Just close down PowerPoint.
And then hit it again.
There you go. Okay, start from the beginning.
Once you launch it, it takes a second. See, it's blue circle. There you go. All right, there we go.
Okay, now I can see two slides though, guys. So remember where we did the display settings? Perfect. Nice. And the speaker slide is up.
Yes.
For detailed biographies, please check them out at the S&M Web Academy website. We have Swarupa Ganguly, the measurement team leader here at the US EPA's Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, ORCR, and we have Hope Pillsbury, analyst with the US EPA's Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery. We will take a few questions after the formal presentations. Please feel free to type questions throughout the webinar. Moving into today's webinar, please note the disclaimer. And now to our speakers. Today's format will be 60 minutes with our two speakers presenting, followed by a web demonstration given by me, and then we'll handle all your questions at the end. Swarupa has been working overtime trying to expand and enhance our measurement efforts, and Hope has been the primary contact person for this report. So without further ado, please welcome Swarupa and Hope.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, and thank you, Kent, for the kind introduction. As many of you know, our last webinar on this topic was in fall 2018, and I'm sure many of you were in that webinar. During that time, we released our 2015 numbers. So in the last 16 months, we have been quite busy, and we've actually produced 2 years worth of data for both 2016 and 2017. I know Christine at the earlier part of this webinar said we're going to mainly focus on 2017. We will give you a little bit of a snapshot of the 2016 numbers, and of course, all this data is on our website, which Kent will walk you through at the latter part of the presentation. So in a very general sense, the outline that you're going to see today is going to be an overview and trends of MSW data with a deeper look on the 2017 data. Then an overview and trends of construction and demolition data. Then some economics data that are related to the MSW industry, such as commodity prices of major recyclable materials, landfill tipping fees, and personal consumption and expenditure. And then finally, as I said before, we will end with a web demonstration with the spotlight on some of the new features on our website. So here, what you see, just to take a step back, I want to sort of highlight the history of our facts and figures report. EPA has collected and reported data on the generation and disposal of waste in the United States for more than 30 years now. Each year, we issue a summary fact sheet, which is accompanied by a set of about 60 tables and figures with detailed supporting data. In November of 2019, we published 2 years of data, as I mentioned earlier, both 2016 and 17. We also did things a little differently last year. We published data for one material, which was paper, about 3 months early, and have made continued improvements on the website, including a new interactive data visualization feature, which again, we will demonstrate for you later on in the presentation. Okay, so before we jump into all the data, I want to step back and provide you with an overview of MSW methodology and how we calculate the figures for facts and figures. So the scope of MSW methodology is, of course, MSW, which is comprised of items that consumers like you typically throw away in your trash. Think about packaging, food, yard trimmings, furniture, electronics, tires, and appliances. That is basically the universe of what we calculate in facts and figures MSW. I want to be clear that MSW does not include a few things such as industrial waste, hazardous or construction waste, and construction and demolition waste, which of course we will talk about separately. One point to note here is sometimes at the facility level in landfills, they do include C&D and sometimes non-hazardous industrial waste, but for the purposes of our calculation, we just focus on MSW. Sources of MSW. So where does MSW come from? In our calculation, we use MSW coming from residential waste, including waste from single and multifamily housing, waste from commercial and institutional locations such as businesses, schools, restaurants, and hospitals. So the facts and figures uses what is called a materials flow approach. We get a lot of questions on this, so the best way to characterize this is it is based on national data, and it characterizes the waste stream as a whole, basically providing a snapshot of the nation's MSW waste. What it is not a bottom-up approach, which is state by state or facility by facility. Some other organizations do that, but ours is really a top-down approach. Using data from industry associations, businesses, and government sources, such as the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Census Bureau, and other sources of data, such as state websites, we estimate the weight of MSW of all the materials and products generated, recycled, composted, combusted, and landfilled. We also use other sources of data to supplement this information, such as, say, state and local waste characterization reports, which are performed either by governments, industries, or other stakeholder organizations. So here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for, the slide that provides the preview of both the 2016 and 17 data. So what you can see at a snapshot is that the overall generation of MSW has gone up from 2016 to 2017. So you're seeing 2,066.8 million tons in 2016 to 2,067.8 million tons in 2017. The per capita generation, however, has gone down slightly. We measure per capita generation in pounds per person per day, and it's gone down from 4.53 pounds per person per day to 4.51 pounds per person per day. If you break it down further, the MSW generated into tons recycled, you'll notice that recycling has gone down a little bit from 68.6% to 67.2%, whereas total tons composted went up from 25.1% in 2016 to million tons in 2017, and we're talking in tonnage. The next figure is in percentages, so the resulting tons recycled, which includes both the composting and the recycling rate, has therefore gone up, mainly because the composting rate has gone up. And this is a figure we use quite a bit. It's gone up from 35.1% to 35.2%. And then finally, the millions ton combusted with energy recovery has gone up slightly from 33.9% to 34%, and million tons landfill also has gone up slightly from 139.2 to 139.6. Sorry, these are all in million tons. So now we're going to look briefly at MSW generation rates over the years. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, EPA has been collecting this data for 30 years. However, we do have data from 1960. So this chart sort of nicely tabulates, how MSW generation rate has gone up from 1960 to 2017. So you can see the latest figures of 2017, as I mentioned before, gone up quite a bit since the 1960 numbers, which were only about at 88.1 million tons. The line below, again, back to the per person per day, also shows how the MSW generation in pounds per person has gone up slightly, but then you can see that it's really started leveling off, starting, say, around 1990, where it was 4.57. It's actually gone down quite a bit, to about 4.51 per person per day, pounds per person per day. So now I'm going to give you just a snapshot of the MSW recycling and composting rates. The orange line, which was first above but now is below, just tabulates the recycling and composting rate that I talked about earlier on the slide. And again, you can see, our nation from a rate of 6.4% in 1960 has gone up quite a bit, with the stark dramatic growth, say, from 1985 to 2000 to our current level of today, which has been sort of flattening out. I shouldn't say flatlining, flattening in the last couple of years. And at the same time, you can see the MSW overall recycling rate, composting overall generation in tons has gone up to the 94.2% we have today. So with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Hope, who's going to dive into some of the details of the 2017 data that I know you've all been waiting for.
Thank you, Sarupa. And so this pie chart shows generation of MSW by material in 2017. And here are some key highlights. The top 4 categories in terms of generation are paper at 25%, food at about 15%, and plastics and yard trimmings at about 13% each. The pie chart for the previous year, 2016, looks similar to this 2017 one. Going back in time to the year 2000, the 2 biggest changes were that the proportion of paper in the pie chart was 36% instead of 25%, and the proportion of plastics in the pie chart was 10.5% instead of about 13%. So the proportion of paper in MSW generated has gone down, and the proportion of plastics has gone up somewhat. Next, I'll talk about MSW management in the United States as a whole, an overview. For our recycling rate, recycling and composting are combined. In this pie chart, however, we've broken out recycling and composting separately. Recycling is about 25% of MSW management, while composting is about 10%. This composting rate is aided by a yard trimmings composting rate of 69.4%. Going back to the pie chart, combustion is almost 13%. And finally, the largest management method for MSW in the U.S. is landfilling, just over 50%. The percentages were roughly the same in the previous year in 2016. Next, I'll look at each of these 4 management methods in more detail. This is MSW recycling in 2017. Looking at recycling only apart from composting, the largest proportion of the recycling pie chart was for paper and paperboard. This includes products such as newspaper, office-type paper, and corrugated cardboard. 65.7% of the recycling in MSW in the U.S. was from paper and paperboard. This is down slightly from the 2016 percentage, which was 66.3%. And then 12.4% was from metals, and then lesser amounts were from other materials. And going to the MSW composting in 2017, the total composting for yard trimmings and food went up from 25 million tons in 2016 to 27 million tons in 2017. The majority of composting was for yard trimmings at over 90%. About 3,860 community composting programs for yard trimmings were documented in 2017, an increase from 3,560 in 2013. The remainder of the composting was for food, 9.5%. And then another note about food. The food composting curbside collection program served 6.1 million households in 2017. This is up from 5.6 million in 2016. Now moving on to combustion with energy recovery, or waste to energy. Food was the largest component of material going to combustion with energy recovery at 22%. This percentage was similar in 2016. Slightly over 16% of MSW going to combustion was from rubber, leather, and textiles, mostly from tires. For example, about 2.7 million tons of tires were combusted in 2017, down slightly from 3 million in 2016. Going back to the pie chart, 16.4% of MSW going to combustion was from plastics, and the percentages for 2016 were similar. Next, I'll go talk about landfilling. Similarly to the combustion slide, food was the largest component of materials going to landfilling at 2%. The percentage was similar in 2016. About 19% of MSW going to landfills was from plastics. About 13% of MSW going to landfills was from paper and paperboard. 11.5% of MSW going to landfills was from rubber, leather, and textiles. If you think back to the composting slide, the combustion slide, this 11.5% of MSW going to landfills from rubber, leather, and textiles compares to 16.6% for that grouping in the combustion pie chart. And then this pie chart was similar to 2016. In the next two slides, I'll provide some more detail on recycling. The top three materials recycled in the U.S. were, these are materials rather than products, were paper and paperboard, metals, and glass. A couple points about plastics. The overall plastics recycling rate was about 80%. This, of course, includes plastic in furniture and plastic in products such as large appliances. Getting a little more specific, the recycling rate for plastics containers and packaging, which includes plastic bags, wraps, and bottles, was 13%. And then getting even more specific, the rate for PET bottles and jars was about 29%, and the rate for HDPE bottles was about 31%. And recycling rates were similar in 2016. This next figure shows recycling rates of selected products with high recycling rates. 99, the clear winner is lead acid batteries. 99% of them were recycled in 2017. Regulations require lead acid batteries to be managed in an environmentally sound way. There is a robust infrastructure for the convenient recycling of batteries. Also, the lead in the plastic, the polypropylene in batteries, has a high value. Next bar over, 88.4% of corrugated boxes were recycled, down from 92.5% in 2016. About 40% of tires by weight were recycled. This does not include combustion with energy recovery. And about 36% of selected consumer electronics were recycled. These included computers, TVs, cell phones, and similar items. There is a lot of interest in food management in the United States. The generation tonnage went up slightly from 2016 to 2017. Composting tonnage went up as well. The resulting composting rate went up from 5.3% in 2016 to 6.3% in 2017. Finally, as stated before, 22% of the MSW landfill was for food. This next slide is on environmental benefits from reduced greenhouse gas emissions. In 2017, the management of MSW through recycling, composting, combustion with energy recovery, and landfilling prevented over 184.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas reductions in 2017 are comparable to the annual emissions from over 39.2 million passenger vehicles. My next two slides are on C&D debris generation. Again, this is outside of the scope of municipal solid waste. The total C&D debris generation was 569 million tons in 2017, more than twice the amount of MSW generated. This is up from 561 million tons in 2016 due to normal increases in C&D debris generation over time. This pie chart breaks down C&D debris generation composition by material. Concrete was the largest at 70%, and asphalt concrete, which is asphalt, was 15%. The generation of other products is less than 10%. And these pie chart percentages are similar to those for 2016. This chart displays the amount of C&D debris generation from buildings, roads and bridges, and other structures for each material with C&D debris. The other structures category includes communication, power, sewer and waste disposal, water supply, and the manufacturing infrastructure. Of the three categories, the three columns, roads and bridges contributed the most to C&D debris generation. Most of the generated waste is from concrete. And now I'll turn this back over to Swarupa, who will present slides relating to economics.
Thank you, Hope, and thanks for that real detailed description of all the data for both MSW and C&D. So now we're going to jump back to the MSW world and talk a little bit about economics. So in our facts and figures report, in addition to the MSW data, we also analyze some of the broader economic indicators that affect the waste industry. So this first graph that you see with all these lines is actually a picture of what happens to typical commodity values over time. And it gives us a comparison of commodity values of various materials relative to one another. So these commodities are items that you would typically see in recycling. For example, HDPE natural bottles, PET clear bottles, aluminum used beverage cans, steel cans, old newspaper, old corrugated containers, paper stock. And as you can see by the graph, that these are index values. And what that really means is that these values are, because all these commodities come in different metrics, such as dollars per ton or dollars per gross ton, we sort of rely on an index formula so that we can put them all in one measure and then compare them across time. So in this case, we are using 1990 as the base index year, and you can see all the commodities spiking up and down relative to each other. So what do these figures basically show? They show that there are similar trends across commodities. So for example, you can see the values of paper and plastic spiked in 1995. That's that sort of orange. In my graph, it looks gold or slightly yellow colored line. And then other commodities dipped in 2009. There was some economic issues in 2009 that may have caused that. Additionally, many commodities such as plastic and paper experienced a price spike in the year 2000, 2007, and 2011, followed by a dip in 2015. Now, one of the nice things about indexing is you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can compare these materials. So you can see the index lines for glass, aluminum, and steel, which are in the lower colored graphs, the purple, the blue, and the orange. they didn't appear to fluctuate as frequently. So that it's just a way to compare and see what's going on in the recycling commodity markets, because they are a big part of what is going on in recycling. One thing I should mention, in case you were wondering, is there was a gap in the years between 1996 and 1999, and that's mainly because we didn't have data for some of the materials, commodities, ONP, which is old newspapers, metals, plastic, and glass in 1997 and 98. So this next graph, we're going to turn to national landfill tipping fees. Tipping fees, as many of you might know, are very important to consider because they typically increase as landfill capacity decreases. So what this overall figure shows you is kind of average tipping fees for the nation from basically 1979 to 2017. The figure shows that between 1985 and 95, there was a rapid rise in landfill fees in the United States, followed by a slow decrease from 95 to 2004, and then it's been kind of hovering around the $40 per ton space. And let's see, it seems like it's dipped a little bit, gone a little bit higher in 2017. One of the interesting things about the averages is they don't really show what's going on at the regional level. So if you really wanted to parse it down, this graph doesn't necessarily show that, but you will note from the data that the average tipping fee in states that have sort of larger landfill capacity, say states in the West like Texas, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, they typically will have lower tipping fees. So the average for those states, for example, is 35.69 per ton versus, say, the average in the Northeast, which is almost double at about 74.75 per ton. So thank you for bearing with us for the economics portion. This is the last graph, and we're going to show you a little bit about personal consumption expenditure. And you may be asking, what the heck does personal consumption expenditure have to do with MSW? Well, so in the United States especially, the change in the amount of MSW generated typically mirrors trends in how much money U.S. households spend on goods and services. So we like to track PCE because it is a useful economic metric for us, just to see how MSW is trending on along with PCE. So PCE is basically a useful measure because it calculates U.S. household spending on the type of goods that we use every day, such as clothing, food, vehicles, and recreation services. PCE is also one of the four components of economic growth, along with government spending, private investment, and net exports. And in the United States, PCE accounts for approximately 70% of gross domestic product. So it is a big indicator of economic growth. And PCE adjusted for inflation is referred to as real PCE. So this figure that you see here explores the relationship between MSW generated and real PCE since 1960. Here is where we're going to bring back our old friends that you saw, which is MSW generated and MSW per capita, but here they're wearing an index costume, so they're all indexed to be able to compare themselves to PCE. So you can kind of see the trends of how they all been moving along since 1960. Of course, in this case, 1960 is the base year, so we're indexing it at 1. So what is very interesting about this graph is it's showing that the rate of real PCE increased at a faster rate than MSW generation, and the difference has become even more distinct since the mid-1990s. So In other words, the index shows that the amount of MSW generated per dollar is falling, and the key message in this graph is that the U.S. economy has been able to enjoy dramatic increases in household spending on consumer goods and services without that societal impact of similarly increasing MSW generation rates. The graph also shows that MSW generated per capita leveled off in the early to mid 2000s. And you saw that, of course, in the previous graph, but it wasn't indexed against PCE because we wanted to wait for this final moment to show you that. So this concludes the economic indicator section of our report. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kent, who's going to give you a live demonstration of our new website, which we released in 2018, but we're going to walk you through it again and show you some new features. Kent?
Thank you. And here we go.
Bear with us for a second as we get the website started.
Okay, is it showing up? Okay, Chris, is it showing up all right?
Good.
All right. Thank you, Hope and Swarupa, and thank you for all the wonderful questions you've been asking. I've been trying to categorize them and put them together for us so we can try to answer some of your wonderful questions here. So thank you for all those wonderful questions. So that 10 years ago, Hope and I did a Federal Register notice to try to ask everyone what are the things we need to do to improve the facts and figures report. And beyond several of the things that came out of that wonderful survey of people's attitudes was, one, they wanted to keep this report, and two, they wanted to somehow get it more on the web and have more access to this data and to all it, and have more analysis of what is happening. So it's been a 5-year process and a 2-year process. A colleague of ours right here in the communications section spent 2 years of his life converting all this wonderful data and trying to put it on the website for all of you to use. And part of the process is by having it web-based and having that data available will lead us to giving you more service and quicker service. One of the questions I noticed in there was asking us about what's going on with the data lag. And I'm going to go ahead and let Swarupa answer that question as I set up the walkthrough.
Okay, so we do get that question a lot, and the reason for the data lag is typically it takes the EPA about a year. There's always, we get our data, as I mentioned earlier, from industry and government sources. So any given year, it takes about a year for those sources to release the data. So for example, right now, you know, it's already 2020. We're just getting the data for 2018, actually. So yeah, between a year to almost 2 years. Then we have an internal process where we actually have to calculate the data. We get help on that, but we have to vet it, calculate it, get it approved. So by that time, there's always going to be about at least a 2-year gap. So with this year, as I mentioned earlier, we released the 2017 numbers in 2019, so that's about a 2-year gap. And this year we're working on our 2018 numbers. So typically there should be about a 2-year gap. So that's the reason for the delay as is.
Now, and so that's the old paradigm, and we're trying to transition to the new paradigm. And by having everything web-based, as we the goal here and the vision here is that as soon as a particular industry has all their data in, we can actually put it up there. In fact, we experimented last fall with that with paper. We actually were able to get the data earlier from the paper industry, and we actually posted the paper data last fall.
3 months early, yeah.
3 months early. So the goal here is, now that we have this web-based platform and we have all this capability to make it more live and more engaged with all of you fine folks, we hope to cut down that lag and hopefully create a faster return loop overall. So Drew did this fantastic job here of creating this facts and figures, materials, waste, and recycling website for us. And there's two parts to that. We have it categorized by basic information, which includes the key definitions, frequent questions, report and data tables. And another question we had was, well, where's all the state and local data? Well, Srupa can explain to you how this is a top-down methodology. So we don't have any state and regional data per se in this national snapshot with facts and figures. Now, we have been collecting state data with the state measurement program the last 5 years, and we have over 40 states voluntarily participating in that program. And there are also some local data is available as well. So we have been able to list particularly waste characterization studies and job studies at the state and local level, and we report that, and you can find that right here, along with the Recycling Economic Information Report. Another piece of the puzzle here is that we've created this national overview. So you have a current national picture that gives you a snapshot of generation, the recycling and composting, combustion with energy, and landfilling, the pathways of materials management in the United States. And we sliced and diced the data in a different way by allowing everyone to pull out the data with common materials and products. So you can look at containers and packaging, electronics, food, construction, demolition debris, the generation side for now, and then all materials and products. And then for all those researchers out there, we've set it up so that you can actually download the facts and figures, summary tables, and view research memos, and the actual methodology for this top-down methodology report. So that, in the facts and figures, materials, waste, recycling website, we have on the left-hand side, you'll have the facts and figures home, which I just walked you through. The second part is to learn about facts and figures, where you can actually get material-specific data and product-specific data. And that's this page right here. And there are also the national overview, and we'll look at that next, where you actually get a snapshot with some integrated pictures and links to the methodology. And starting with, of course, the important piece of the puzzle, the waste management hierarchy, where source reduction reuse is at the top of the hierarchy, recycling and composting comes next, followed by energy recovery, and then treatment and disposal and landfilling, and the pathways involved. So for each of these sections, you're going to find some graphics as well as some supplanted data. So you can actually pick on a particular date and see the recycling, composting, combustion energy, and landfilling for that particular year, and see it over time. So we've tried to create an opportunity for you to quickly access and get graphic representation of all this data that has been collected since 1960. Another way to find out about the materials or questions you might have is go to the A to Z directory for facts and figures, where you'll have this glossary of all the particular commodities, products, appliances, and the like, so that you can search and find your particular area of interest and quickly get to that data and descriptions of those programs. There's also a page for frequently asked questions to help you find that. And then last but not least, you have the full data tables that are available. So we tried to make this as integrated as possible. We've also Drew did a fantastic job of trying to find quick links on each section so that you can quickly go back to other sections or to go to other research memos. For instance, here you can go to volume and weight conversion factors, which is a popular question when you're trying to do waste characterization studies and moving forward, trying to do things locally. So there are all the data tables from 2012 through 2017 on this page. And then another piece of the puzzle is that every year, as we prepare for collecting the data for the next round, we also try to, we've spent the last 10 years trying to enhance and improve and expand this program and this report. And so we've done that with what we call scoping memos or research memos, where we set the foundation for where's the data, what data is available, how is that applicable or not applicable to the existing methodology, and try to expand and improve this report. So you can go to this part of the website to track that down and learn more about food waste management in 2014 and electronics and electronic products, post-consumer food diversion, bio-based products, historic tipping fees, and the like. And for instance, that 2015 document became the basis for what we now presented, what Swarupa just presented to you today, where we actually can show you the tipping fees over time. I know we had a question about the minimum and maximum on that, and I'll return to that question in a few minutes. Now, if you're looking at, when you're looking at materials, you can quickly go to the materials page and quickly zero in right in on your particular area of interest, and it will give you some tonnage data as well, along with the statistics, and also walk you through context and give you context for all those kind of things. And then we also have the products, of which there's durable products, which last 3 years or more, non-durable products, and the containers and packaging. And you can actually get detailed explanation and give you context for the data in those data tables right here on the website. And there you are on that. And then the national picture where you can see what's happening. And the most classic example, of course, is containers packaging, because that's the biggest part of the data. And our communications folks set up this template so that for each year when we update the numbers, you can have a quick infographic, and you can have, after your Super Bowl party, you can actually have some factoids you can throw at somebody. For instance, did you know about 75% of all food that could be composted is still ending up in landfills? Hence the reason why EPA is focusing so much on food waste. And this whole infographic walks you through all kinds of different information that you can use for your own programs. So that's a quick introduction to the EPA website on facts and figures. Now I'm going to turn the screen back over to Swarupa. Let's see if I can get that to work. There you go. And send it over back to you, and you can put it on that last page, the speakers page for us. Just slide the page.
Keep going.
Keep going.
There we go.
And and now I'm going to return to some of your wonderful questions that you've shared with us. And the first question I got for you here is on the methodology. I thought we'd go ahead and do the methodology questions first, and then we'll dive into some more specific questions. There's a series of more than a dozen questions about methodology. I'll summarize them to say that there are questions about trying to give a little more understanding of what the heck the materials flow approach is, and sort of explain that a little more. We already have answered the questions about the data lag, and we also gave a partial answer to about the breakdown of states. So if you can talk about material flow a little more, while I pull up some more questions.
Okay, so thank you, Kent, and I'm actually not surprised to get a lot of questions on material flow, because we, through our contact us, we do have a contact us on our website.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so for those of you who, if we don't get to all of your questions, you can also use our website and provide us with additional questions, which we assure you we'll answer within a day or two, right, Hope? So anyway, so the detail of the material flow. The reason we get this question quite a bit, and I think, is because it is a little bit of an abstract concept. As I mentioned in my earlier slide, a typical way to go around estimating waste would be, going from facility to facility, going from landfill to landfill, going from recycling center, or collecting information on recycling centers, and putting that together and coming up with a national estimate. There are stakeholder groups who do that, and it is a fine way to do things. It is also, labor intensive and can take a while. EPA has taken a slightly different approach, which is more of a modeled approach. And basically what, just to give you an overview, what a materials flow approach is based on production data by weight for the products in the waste stream. And these are the products that I talked about earlier on in my presentation. In our presentation, we talked about, things like food and packaging and, tires, all these type of things that you would typically characterize in the waste stream. So what we do is to estimate the generation. Now, you think of materials flow methodology, you're basically looking at it in terms of two equations. And I promise you, this is just very basic algebra. You're looking at, on the left, the generation side, and on the right, the management side. So to estimate the generation data, we make specific adjustments to the production data that we get from the sources that I mentioned, from commerce and other governmental sources, for each material category, and then make adjustments for imports, exports, and product lifetimes. So what that really means is that, say we get, I'll just throw it out, like an estimate of a production for refrigerators. Now, since the information that comes to us is on the production of the refrigerator, what we will do is make an adjustment saying, if we get refrigerators in the year X, we know that in the year Y, parts of that refrigerator will become waste. So that's the adjustment for the product lifetime. And then we, as I said earlier, we account for certain things like food and yard trimmings and certain types of inorganic waste by using, information from waste sampling studies and state environmental agency websites. So the generation side, again, back to our equation, on the left-hand side equals the weight of all the materials and products as they enter the waste stream from those residential, commercial, institutional sources. Then we adopt what is called a mass balance approach, which means the left has to equal the right. From the overall generation, then we tease out the different management pathways. So first we tease out recycling, which we again get the numbers mostly from state websites, as well as composting. Recycling, we also, we get it from industry association. And then we get combustion numbers from industry associations that provide information on waste to energy facilities. And then finally, whatever is left over is called landfilling. So that is in sum. So basically, you're looking at, and again, a simple algebraic equation where generation equals recycling plus composting plus landfilling plus combustion with energy. And that's the materials flow in a nutshell. I could talk about this forever. So if you have even more questions, I would urge you to either contact us directly or send a message on our website.
Thank you for that attempt to explain that concept.
One thing I will note about the materials flow approach, what's really nice about it is because it's a modeled approach, it allows us to examine the trends year after year, which is more difficult to do if you're taking a facility by facility approach. So because we've taken this approach, we can look at the trends all the way from 1960 to 2017.
Which is what the folks said they wanted to keep, that national snapshot looking at the trends so that we know where we're going or where we're not going in many cases.
Correct. And I think in the times where we thought about changing to a different approach, we were told by our stakeholders they liked the fact that this provides a continuity in the trend data.
So we had some questions about recycling and what is included or not included in the data, and whether or not the recycling rates includes recycling new products, whether it's being diverted from waste processing facilities, and then whether it includes residuals and contamination. Those kind of questions, have about half a dozen questions like that.
Okay. Maybe one thing that might help is to give an example. For instance, you might think that plastics were measured at curbside or at the front door of the materials recovery facility or MRF, but instead, after passing through the materials recovery facility, they're baled and sold into the recycling market. Material is ready for processing. And this baled amount, which is ready to be processed into pellets or flakes and then made into new plastic products, either here or abroad, is what we count as the amount of plastic recycled.
Yeah, thank you, Hope. That's a great specific example. And I think that the broader point on recycling, and we do get a lot of questions on that, is because we calculate, so we get a lot of recycling data, especially on the materials from industry association, and the way they provide it to us is what is actually baled. So, imagine, baled products sitting at the end of the MRF, ready to go to a reclamation facility or ready actually to go out for exports. That is what we count as recycling. So there's an assumption that some of the contamination, say the residual contamination at the MRF, or even some of the inbound contamination has already been weeded out. So we think that everything that has been contaminated or been taken out of the MRF has already been reported and weeded out by the time it gets to the bale. Now, what it doesn't include is if there's any other contamination that is after it goes to the reclamation facility. It doesn't include that because we just stop our measurement at the bale. Recycling does include exports, but of course, we make an assumption that what is exported gets recycled.
Can you expand on the discussion about clothing recycling?
Yes, we get quite a few questions about clothing recycling. And EPA has a web page on the recycling of clothing and footwear as a combined group. And what's, I think, confusing to many people, is that the recycling rate does not include reuse. So after any reuse, the clothing and footwear either goes to recycling, combustion with energy recovery, or landfilling. If it goes to recycling, the clothing may get recycled into wiper cloths, for example. The recycling rate for clothing and footwear in 2017 was 13.6%. And as I said, just stated, reuse occurs before generation, so what's going out to those kind of programs is not included in the generation or recycling estimates.
Thank you. We had so many questions and we have so little time. I apologize. We won't be able to get to all your questions today. I did want to let you know about the next SMM Web Academy, which is on March 5th at 1 to 2 p.m. and it'll be on disaster debris and deconstruction and rebuilding and resilience lessons from the hurricanes Katrina and Irene. So stay tuned for that. That's our next webinar, again, on March 5th at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank my colleagues today and today's speakers for their insights on facts and figures.